Ask anyone to name an ancient African queen, and the first images that come to mind are almost always Egyptian. The iconic silhouette of Nefertiti or the legendary allure of Cleopatra dominate our collective imagination. But there is a historical caveat to these famous figures. They were primarily regent queens. Their power was often exercised on behalf of someone else, taking over the duties of their brothers or holding the throne for their young sons. If we look south, past the borders of ancient Egypt into modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia, we find a different model of leadership. This was the Kingdom of Kush. Here, in the Kushite capital of Meroe, women did not hold the throne as temporary placeholders for men. They wore the royal insignia because they were the absolute, legitimate owners of the crown. This unique power structure faced a severe test in 25 BC. The Roman Empire, under the command of Emperor Augustus, had recently conquered Egypt. Now, Rome's military machine was pivoting south, locking its sights on Kush. Roman generals anticipated a swift victory. They were facing an enemy they considered inferior because it was led by women. That assumption resulted in a catastrophic military miscalculation. The women who ruled Kush held a specific title, the Candaces. For decades, historians mistranslated this word as Queen Mother, but the Candaces were the primary sovereigns, sitting at the absolute top of the royal hierarchy. This was a pragmatic system of matrilineal succession. The right to rule flowed strictly down a vertical line of female figures, bypassing male consorts. The logic was biological. Paternity could be questioned, but the physical link between a mother and child was a verifiable fact. In Rome, power shifted between disputed male heirs, resulting in frequent civil wars. Meroe avoided this. Their matrilineality was a political engine. It secured an unbroken line of undisputed, universally supported commanders. They would need that unified leadership when the Roman legions finally crossed their borders. In 25 BC, heavily armored Roman soldiers marched into the harsh desert terrain to crush the Kushite resistance. Waiting for them on the battlefield was Queen Amanirenas, a battle-hardened Candace who personally directed her kingdom's military forces. Much of what we know about this conflict comes from the Greek historian Strabo, who documented the war for a Roman audience. Strabo's description of Amanirenas was terrifying. He wrote that the Roman soldiers were fighting an enormous woman with a masculine look who had lost an eye in combat. We have to read between the lines of this propaganda. To the Roman mindset, a woman wielding military power was an aberration. They only understood female rulers as either seductive enchantresses or grotesque monsters. Amanirenas, a fierce, battle-scarred warrior, was cast as the latter. Regardless of how they described her, the Romans could not defeat her. For nearly 4 years, Amanirenas led a war of attrition, pushing back against Rome's military superiority and exhausting their resources in the desert. Her resistance forced Emperor Augustus to halt his conquest and sit down at the negotiating table with an African queen. The peace treaty ending the war is one of the most astonishing documents of the era. The conflict concluded in a status quo, but one heavily tilted in Meroe's favor. Augustus agreed to remarkable concessions. Kush paid zero tribute to Rome, they regained previously lost borderlands, and Rome swore never to invade. That treaty held. Secure from Roman aggression, subsequent Candaces like Queen Amanirenas oversaw an era of peace and architectural expansion. They built hundreds of steep-sided pyramids that still stand in the Sudanese desert today. So, if the Candaces successfully halted the Roman legions and built a thriving empire, why is their story so often overlooked? The answer lies in whose records we can actually read. For 2,000 years, Roman accounts were the only accessible narrative, because the Meroitic script was undeciphered. Now, researchers are finally mapping the phonetic values and grammatical structures of the language. As the original texts are slowly translated, the Roman narrative is being superseded by the Kushite perspective. The Candaces proved that a female-led empire was a highly successful reality. They built an unbreakable chain of succession, and they held their ground against the ancient world's greatest superpower.